Recording by Constance Cooper. Nightmare on the Nose by Evelyn E. Smith. Every time he lost money at the track, Phil Watson had a nightmare. They grew increasingly frequent as his bankroll dwindled and his hopes of getting rich dwindled accordingly. The night after he had dropped $200 at Jamaica, the nightmare grew particularly oppressive. In the darkness, he could see her red eyes glowing at him as she sat on his chest. "Would you mind not turning over so much?" she asked, seeing that he was awake. "It makes me uncomfortable." "It makes you uncomfortable," he moaned. "How would you like to have a couple of tons of horse sitting on you?" "I do not weigh a couple of tons," she snapped. "And furthermore, I assure you, I'm sitting on your chest out of duty. Certainly not out of pleasure. If you don't think I have lots better things to do with my nights than go around sitting on people." Her large white teeth gleamed in a significant leer. He sighed and squirmed again. A sharp hoof kicked him in the side. "I ought to learn you not to wiggle, Watson. Since you're not sleeping," she added, "how about a couple of games of canasta?" "I've been losing enough on the races. I'm not going to start gambling with a supernatural card shark." "Listen here," the nightmare bristled. "I can beat you at any game without the use of supernatural powers. You're known as the #1 sucker at all the tracks." That's right. Kick a man when he's down." "I'm sorry," she apologized. "I didn't mean to be unsporting, but you get me so mad." "Unsporting," he mused, then sat up as a terrific idea hit him. "Watch your step, Watson," the nightmare warned when the sudden movement nearly threw her off the bed. "I've been standing for a lot from you, but—" "Listen, can you run?" "Run? What do you mean, run?" "How fast can you go?" "Well, I'll be honest with you. Down where I come from, I'm known as Old Slowpoke. I can't move much faster than the speed of sound, while all the other girls have the velocity of light. But that's the way it is. Some are born with brains and some with speed." "The velocity of sound is good enough," Watson decided. "Look here, Nightmare, how'd you like to run in a race?" "A race?" Then the nightmare chuckled evilly to herself. "Oh, I see what you mean. But that wouldn't be cricket, would it?" "Cricket and horse racing are two distinct sports," Watson stated. Then, alluringly, "How'd you like to run down the track 5 lengths ahead of all the other horses, with the band playing and the crowd cheering? You'd be led into the winner's circle, and they'd drape flowers all over you. People would yell, 'Nightmare! Nightmare!' You'd be a popular figure, a celebrity. This way, nobody knows you. You work at night, alone, unappreciated and unsung." "That's so true," the nightmare murmured. "I really haven't received the adulation I deserve. Here I've done my job faithfully for years, scared thousands of people into fits. And what thanks do I get? None." She sobbed. "Other people get all the credit and glory. I just work, like a horse." "If you work for me," Watson said, "you'll only run a mile or so 2 or 3 times a week, get the finest of care, and," he pointed out significantly, "your nights will be your own." "Watson," the nightmare assured him, "I'm sold. When do we start?" "It isn't as easy as all that." Watson rose and paced up and down the room. "First of all, you're not in the stud book. We'll have to forge some papers and pass you off as an Argentinian horse." "Sí, señor," said the nightmare, wriggling with pleasure. "Hablo muy bien el español. El estribo de mi padre es en el establo de mi madre. Yo soy del rancho grande. Olé!" "It isn't necessary for you to speak Spanish. As a matter of fact, you won't get to do any talking at all. Horses don't talk. But I do, she said, wounded. Where I come from, I'm known as a witty and distinguished raconteur. You know the one about the 2 geldings? Never you mind, he told her. From now on, you don't talk except to me. Get it? Yeah, the nightmare agreed. All right, Watson, I'll give it a whirl. I've always wanted to be in the public eye. For the sake of expediency, Watson decided to give the nightmare, now officially registered as Incubus, her preliminary workouts himself, although he was no trainer. But then Incubus really needed no workouts. It merely looked well to take her around the track a few times. Remember, Inky, he whispered, not too fast. We want to give him a big surprise at the meet. I dig you, she whispered back. Reuben Godlove, the well-known trainer, sauntered past and looked at Incubus. My God, he told Watson, what kind of a monster are you running? She's got a face like a gargoyle and a rear like a hippopotamus. You want I should clout him in the crupper? Incubus whispered. No, he whispered back. I'm glad he doesn't take to you, because if he thought you were any good, he might claim you. Claim me? What do you mean? Well, you see, he explained, since you're unknown and have no record, I've had to enter you in a claiming race. That means anybody who's running another horse in the same race can put in a claim for you before the race, for the price I set on you, and become your owner. What's the price you set on me? Watson hemmed and hawed. $3,000, he admitted. Incubus cocked an eye at him. You selling me down the river for a mess of pottage, Watson? No, he assured her. I can't help it. This is some goddamn silly racing rule. You have no reputation, so I've got to enter you in a maiden claimer. Incubus raised an eyebrow. A maiden claimer? A maiden horse, he explained austerely, is one which has never won a race. Oh, she said, sorry. Now, if the worst comes to the worst, and you do get claimed, we can figure out ways and means of getting you back, can't we, Inky? Incubus laughed richly. Clout him in the crupper, she chortled. Oh, man. The day dawned when Incubus was to make her debut at Belmont. The odds on her were 100 to 1. Laughing softly to himself, Watson put $500 on her nose. You crazy fella, the seller said to him. The horse to bet on is Godlove's Pamplemousse. He's a natural to win. Incubus is my own horse, Watson explained patiently. Oh, I guess it's like my kid. He plays the piano and stinks, but I got a clap for him all the same. Why didn't you give her some hip-reducing exercises? Godlove sneered as the jockey led Incubus out into the paddock. She'll never get through the starting gate with that spread. Take it easy, Watson told her as she reared. Now listen, he said to the jockey, a sullen young apprentice, all he could get. She responds to direction very well. Talk to her. She practically understands. Oh, sure, the jockey jeered. Is Snookum's going to win the race for Daddykins? Yes, replied Incubus. The jockey stared at her and at Watson. Watson laughed a trifle too hard. I'm a great ventriloquist, he explained. Can't break myself of the habit. Well, you better begin now, the jockey said, because I'm temperamental, and when I'm emotionally disturbed, the horse senses it. The horses, the announcer declaimed through the loudspeaker, are at the post. They're off. All of them, that is, except Incubus. She can't get through the starting gate. She's stuck. Ah, wear a girdle, the crowd called derisively. With a wrench of sheer rage, Incubus pulled herself through the gate and dashed after the other horses. In the backstretch, it's Pamplemousse in the lead, with disestablishmentarianism and epigram running half a length behind, and... But who's this coming up from the rear? It's Incubus! She's ahead by a length, by 2 lengths, by 3 lengths. What a horse! What a jockey! He's giving her the whip! Oh, something's wrong. Incubus has lost her rider. Too bad, Incubus. The horses raced up the stretch, with Incubus keeping 5 lengths ahead of Pamplemousse, as per direction. She was much annoyed to discover that he had won the race. But I won it, she kept whispering to Watson as he led her off. I was first. This is a frame-up. I'm going right to the judges and raise an objection. It doesn't count if you don't have the jockey on you, he told her. That's the rule. Flap the rules, she said. You mean without that peewee it doesn't count? A fine thing. I hate the rules. I hate the rules. I hate the rules. She stamped her foot. He hit me with a whip, the little bastard, so I gave him the old heave-ho. Come on now, Incubus. We'll get another jockey who won't whip you. You see how easy you can win a race? She tossed her head. I'm not so sure I want to run again. You know you want to run, Incubus. You've made a big impression. I could see that. Who cares what people think? I saw Pamplemousse giving you the eye, Watson murmured. Good-looking horse, isn't he? Any filly'd be glad to have him interested in her. Oh, I don't know, Incubus said. He's all right, I guess, if you like them tall and dark. But okay, I'll try it again for you, Watson. Godlove accosted them again as Watson led Incubus into her stall. I take back what I said about your horse, Watson, he apologized. She looks like a fiend, but she runs like one, too. With the proper handling, she might be a stake horse. He looked speculatively at Incubus. Give you 5,000 for her, big rump and all. Not on your life. Godlove shrugged. Suit yourself, but she'll have to run in another claimer, you know. He left, laughing softly. After 2 weeks of steady diet and vigorous massage, during which her hip measurements were considerably reduced, Incubus was entered in a $4,000 claimer. Even though she was still a maiden, she was favored next to Pamplemousse by the players, for her unusual first start had not passed unnoticed. Watson bet another 500, to obtain which he had mortgaged the old homestead. But this time he could get only even money. Remember, Incubus, he instructed her as he buckled her saddle. If Godlove claims you, you know what to do. Sure do. Shall I let him live afterward? Yeah, let him live. Just make it uncomfortable for him. Now, look here, Sonny. This to the new jockey. She doesn't like the whip. You saw what she did to her last boy? The jockey nodded and gulped. All you have to do is sit on her, let her go where she wants. Then you'll be all right. I wouldn't even get near her, the boy said, if I didn't have an aged mother to support. The starter waved the yellow flag and the horses were off. Incubus raced neck and neck with Pamplemousse until they were a furlong from the finish line. Then she surged ahead to win by 5 lengths. When she rode into the winner's circle, the crowd booed, as is their pleasant custom with winning horses and jockeys. A popular figure, eh? Incubus sneered. Tch. You know, Mr. Watson, the jockey said, as he was assisted from the horse, with a dazed but beatific smile on his face. I'm so steamed up over this win, I even thought Incubus was talking to me. The men standing around laughed. You've let excitement go to your head, Godlove remarked. Personally, I would never hire a jockey who has no emotional equilibrium. The jockey reached a tentative finger toward Incubus's nose. Good horse, he said. Good Incubus. I think you're pretty nice yourself, Incubus murmured out of the side of her mouth. There was a stricken silence. Reuben Godlove's eyes narrowed. jockey who rode her the other day told me about your ventriloquism," he informed Watson. "Seems like a pretty cheap trick, if you ask me." The others murmured agreement, color flowing back into their faces. "Anyhow, now that she's my horse," Godlove went on, taking possession of Incubus's bridle, "she's going to be trained serious." "Now?" Incubus asked Watson. "Later," he whispered back. "That ain't funny, Watson," Godlove assured him. As he led Incubus off, she looked back over her shoulder and winked. "Mr. Watson," the jockey said, following him off the field, "you're not really a ventriloquist, are you? That horse talks, doesn't she?" Watson nodded. "You gonna let Godlove get away with her?" The boy's voice rose to a shrill squeak. "I'll claim her back in the next race." "Yeah, but you can't claim her back less'n you've entered another horse in the same race, and you don't have another horse, do you, Mr. Watson?" Watson's jaw dropped. "I never thought of that. What'll I do?" "You've got to get another horse, Mr. Watson. Do you have enough money?" "Well, the purse from this race is almost 2,000, and I made another 1,000 betting on Incubus. And of course, Godlove gave me 4,000 for her, but that won't be enough to buy a decent horse and maintain him. Expenses are terrific." The jockey chewed his lower lip thoughtfully. "I know what you can do," he said at length. "You can buy Prunella. She's set at a price of $5,000, but her owner's pretty disgusted with her. She has good lines, but she finished last in 27 starts. I think you could have her for 4,000 in cash." Prunella, a meek-looking chestnut filly with big brown eyes and a vicious temper, was enthusiastically disposed of for 4,000 and installed in Incubus's vacant stall. Watson shed a silent tear to see Incubus's second-best saddle hanging there on the wall. In the dead of night, he slipped into Godlove's stable. Incubus was awake, reading the Morning Telegraph. "Look at the picture they have of me," she snapped. "Obviously taken by an enemy. Next time, Watson, remember, my right profile is the best." "I'll remember," he promised, and told her what had happened. "You're sure this Prunella isn't taking my place in your affections?" she demanded severely. "That all this isn't a subterfuge?" "My God, no. She quits before she starts." "All right," Incubus said. "Now I am reliably informed by the stable grapevine that Godlove's entering me in a $6,000 claimer. You spent almost all your money on Prunella. How are you going to claim me?" There was dead silence in the stable. "These men," she sighed. "Without us females to think for them, they'd be lost. The answer is simple. Prunella's got to win that race. Then you'll have the purse, plus whatever you can bet on her, and you'll get good odds." "Prunella win the race? She couldn't beat a speedy snail." "She'll win the race." Incubus grinned happily. The weather was clear and the track fast. Incubus was running at 3-5. Prunella, 98-1. Reuben Godlove appeared with his arm in a sling and a bandage on his forehead and glowered at Watson. "Fine trainer you are," he snarled. "Let's see how well you've done with her," Watson suggested, smiling amiably. The starting gate opened and all the horses dashed out, all except Prunella, who sauntered forth and stood admiring the view. Incubus turned, ran back, and nipped Prunella viciously in the forequarters. With a whinny of rage, Prunella proceeded to chase Incubus, who was showing a fleet pair of heels, along the track. But there were 6 horses between Prunella and her attacker. With a thrust of her powerful shoulders, Incubus sent Dernier Cri staggering into the geraniums that bordered the field. She thrust a hoof into the path of Kropotkin and sent him and his rider sprawling on the track. She murmured something into Epigram's ear, and that black colt turned light gray and refused to budge another step. There were now 3 horses between Incubus and Prunella. Polyhymnia suddenly started to run backward. Sir Bleoberus buried his head in the sand and pretended he didn't notice the race was still going on. Cachucha, who had hitherto not been known as a jumper, hurdled the rail and dashed into the crowd of astonished players. Still, Incubus ran lightly before Prunella, half a length ahead, kicking dust in her face and making irritating remarks, while the enraged filly laid her ears back and bared white teeth to snap at her rival. 1 length before the finish line, Incubus suddenly stopped short, leaving momentum to carry Prunella over the line to victory. Prunella had won the race. Incubus was second, but was disqualified for conduct unbecoming a horse and a lady. It was never determined who had run third. "Together again at last, Watson," Incubus said during the joyful reunion in the paddock. But it's been a long, long time." 2 weeks, commented the jockey who had ridden Prunella. "Listen, Pipsqueak," Incubus told him irately. "I've spent the whole 2 weeks cooking up this speech, and I don't want a half-pint like you spoiling it. It's been a long, long time, Watson." Prunella nickered. "None of your lip either," Incubus said. "Where would you have been if I hadn't won your race for you?" "Oh, you can run if you want to, can you?" "Ha, ha, Plater." Prunella neighed angrily. "Okay, Watson will enter you in a claimer without me, and we'll see what you can do." She turned toward her owner. "And now, Watson, I trust you have a hot tub prepared? I'm so tired." The racing secretary entered Incubus for an allowance with some misgivings. "But if she behaves again this time the way she did last, she's out, Watson. Suspended, disqualified. Can't have that sort of thing going on, you know." "She's actually the most tractable of horses, sir," Watson assured him. "It's merely that Mr. Godlove didn't know how to handle her." "Oh, the racing secretary said. "And I'd like to enter Prunella in the $5,000 claimer." The racing secretary smiled. "Well, Mr. Watson, you don't have to be afraid that anybody'll claim her. Godlove has spread the word around. Now everybody's afraid to claim a Watson horse." Prunella won handily in her claimer, and Incubus breezed to victory in her allowance. "Bet on Watson horses," the word went round the tracks. Incubus won a Class C, Class B, and Class A handicap in swift progression. Prunella came in first in 2 $7,000 claimers and second in a $10,000 one. And then Incubus came in last in a stake race at Aqueduct. "What's the matter with you, Incubus?" Watson demanded. "You can run 10 times around the track before any of these nags could reach the quarter-mile pole." Incubus lay on her back in the hay and chewed reflectively on a straw. "You know, Watson," she said, "there are finer things in life than racing." "What, for instance?" She simpered. "I've been talking to Pamplemousse, you know, Godlove's horse, and he says it isn't ethical what I'm doing, that I'm competing with horses way below my class, that it isn't fair." "But there aren't any horses in your class." "I know," she sighed. "Sometimes superiority can have its disadvantages. That's what Pamplemousse says. He says it isn't fair for me to run at all. Says woman's place is in the home. Do you think woman's place is in the home, Watson?" Prunella neighed in the adjoining stall. "That's a dirty lie," Incubus shrieked, getting up. "I double dare you to say it once more." Prunella kept silence. "You're in love, Incubus?" Watson asked gently. She bowed her head. I didn't know I could be. I thought I was too tough. But you're never too tough. Oh, I know I'm a stake horse, and he's still only a claimer, but I love him just the same. Well, if that's the way you feel about it, Inky, I guess you have a right to. Only, he gulped, I'd entered you in the Belmont Futurity, and it means so much to me. Incubus wiped away a tear with a wisp of hay. All right, Watson, I'll win the Futurity for you. After all, you have first claim on my loyalty. Who brought me out of obscurity? You. Who recognized my potentialities? You. Who made a horse out of me? You. Incubus won the Belmont Futurity and was carried off the track on the shoulders of a cheering crowd. Retouched photographs of the big black horse hit not only the sport pages, but the front page of every newspaper in the country. But the question of her racing again was shelved for the nonce. Shortly after the Futurity, Watson discovered that Incubus was pregnant. Pamplemousse? He asked. She nodded shyly. But how could you do it? You two were in separate stalls. Incubus snickered. I have my methods, Watson. He's a low cad, said Watson. I knew what I was doing. I went into it with my eyes open. He wondered just how he was going to enter the foal in the stud book. Although it would be of impeccable ancestry, its escutcheon would be marred by a bend sinister. Some months later, Incubus called Watson to her stall. What is it, Inky? I don't know how to tell you this, Watson. I've got to go back. Back? Back where, Inky girl? Back where I came from. Oh, I might have known it was never to be, that you can't wipe out the past. Still, I'd hoped that somehow, some way. But the big bookie says no. I've got to go back where I came from. I don't belong here. He says I was sent as a punishment, not as a reward. She extended a hoof toward Watson's hand. I had my baby tonight, Watson. Take good care of her. She's half equine, so she can stay here. And she'll be the fastest thing on earth when she grows up. Prunella'll help you raise her and support the family. Watson wiped his streaming eyes. I'll take care of your baby, Incubus, he vowed. I'll call her Incubus, too, and I'll treat her as if she were my own daughter. I knew I could count on you, Watson. Well, this is goodbye. Incubus slowly vanished. It was hard losing Incubus. He'd grown attached to her, looking on her not only as a horse, but a friend. Still, at least he had the colt. In 2 years, she would take up where her mother had left off, and again the Watson name would reverberate through the racetracks. He went inside the stall, looked down at Incubus's daughter, who reposed on the hay, looking up at him with big blue eyes. He gasped. He had forgotten. Incubus was not a real horse. She was merely a demon in the shape of a horse. Incubus, too, was not in the shape of a horse.
Read by Ben Tucker. Death in Transit by Jerry Sohl. Clifton stood at the bottom of the shaft, his face white, his eyes wide, his stance against the bulkhead that of a man who needed only a slight push to slump to the floor. Karen, he murmured. Karen. He had been standing there a long time. He was staring at his dead wife, a heap of broken bones and blood on the floor. But he was not seeing her, at least not as she was now. He was seeing her the way his mind kept bringing her back to him. The white evenness of her teeth when she smiled, the fury of her bright blue eyes when she was angry, the way she had uncomplainingly slept on the wrinkled sheets of the bed he had made when she had been ill 10 years before. and the way they had laughed about that when she reminded him of it years later. He moved to stand erect, wondering why he should have thought about that at a time like this. And then, as he looked at her again and saw what the fall had done to her, he clenched his hands in anger. They had said it couldn't happen. But they had been wrong. Man's wisdom was not infinite, after all. All the man-years of thought, all the endless whirring and clicking of the computers and calculators, all of it had not taken into account what might happen to Karen. His hands fell open. He knew that, actually, they had never been wrong. If he had found her right away, he could have put her back together. He could have utilized the synthesizer for anything really bad, like a shattered bone. The needles of the organic analyzer would have told him what else he had to do. But Karen had been dead for hours when he found her. Too long. The damage was irreparable, permanent. She was beyond recall. He might conceivably have animated her muscles, her glands, got her blood to flowing again. But her brain would have remained a vacuous, inert thing. You had to get reconstruction going in a matter of minutes when the brain, the anatomy's most perishable component, was involved. And in some cases he had known the memories were never fully restored. Why couldn't it have been a tumor, a deficiency disease, a nervous breakdown? Insanity. There was nothing the Meadow Center couldn't handle. Its machines were right there on the ship, ready to be used. But Karen had to fall down the ventilator shaft, opening the door and walking into it as if it were her bedroom and falling all the way down and breaking half the bones in her body. And he had found her too late. Hours too late. Too late, he said, and he nodded his head in agreement. And then he was engulfed in sudden pity and remorse and a feeling of loss, as if she had snatched a vital part of him in her going. And hadn't she? Hadn't she taken her laughter with her? The laughter that brightened his days and the things they had shared. He glanced at her, suddenly angry that she should have done this to him, and he glared at the shaft and blew out his cheeks and clenched his hands again, and roared a great cry that echoed deafeningly in the smallness of the shaft. And then he shouted obscenities at the ship and the stars and the 100 people who lay as if dead in neat rows in the sleep locker, and he pounded the walls until blood from his hands left imprints there. But no one heard. There was no one to hear. Only the sleepers who lived their days with his years. "Why?" he shouted while his tears fell. And he thought, I haven't cried since I was a kid. Then, saying her name again and again, he knelt by her side to feel the silkiness of her jet-black hair. There had been no death aboard a Star Transit ship since the very beginning. From the first days of the Great Immigration, more than 100 years before, when the first captain and his wife stepped aboard to pilot the precious cargo of sleeping humans 10 or more years across the vast stellar reaches to colonies on planets in a half-dozen far-distant star systems, there had been no recorded death. But now there would always be Karen. He should have told them she walked in her sleep, but the medical examiners would have shrugged as they had with everything else he had told them. The Meadow Centers would take care of it. You couldn't cure sleepwalking with the devices in the Meadow Center, but they would have taken care of anything that happened as a result, if he had reached her in time. It was unforeseen, this business of her walking into the shaft. No one was to blame, no one, that is, except himself. Clifton looked up from beside his wife to the circle of light at the top of the shaft. "All right," he called out. "I'm to blame, do you hear? I did it. She could be alive except for me." There was no answer to his self-indictment. "And where does it leave me?" he shouted bitterly. "I'm the one who has to live, and I've got 9 years to go. 9 years to Ostarpa and the small colony there. What am I supposed to do?" He never remembered later how long he stood in the shaft, shouting until he was hoarse, only recalling that at one point the walls seemed to close in on him, and the ship seemed filled with an oppressive strangeness, and he was clawing his way up the ladder to the top. And there were blurred images of walls and rooms as he ran about the ship, and he remembered his jerking open the liquor cabinet and the stupor that followed. It was days later when he sobered, and, insulated by the intervening unreality, managed to dispose of her body in a waste chute. Then he moved to the office and saw that it was the 371st day and looked at the log to see that he had stopped making entries on the 363rd day. He examined the other books. Karen's precise handwriting had recorded her final readings on that day, too. Now he would have to do her work as well as his own. Clifton sighed, sat at his desk, and, in a steady hand, wrote in the log. Karen rose in her sleep, walked to and fell down the right aft third-level ventilating shaft and was killed. Reached her approximately 3 hours after the incident. She could not be saved. Clifton West, Captain. Skipping to the 371st day, he wrote, "Sent Karen's body out the ventral waste chute." He sat studying the words, then added, "Am alone on the ship." Instantly he wished he had not written that, but was not moved to cross the words out. It was true enough. He was alone. Would be alone for 9 more years. Suppose something should happen to him. Who would land the ship? And what would happen to the sleepers? He did not want to think about it. The Meadow Center would take care of everything. He didn't walk in his sleep. His duty was to get the 100 humans through to Ostarpa, and then they all would become part of the colony there. Except, of course, he'd be 10 years older than the sleepers upon awakening. He looked at the day gauge on the wall. Just 3,332 days short of Ostarpa. 3,332 days without Karen. An eternity of talking to himself, and listening only to the sound of his own feet as he walked about the ship. A lifetime for remembrance, just as he remembered now how eager they both had been to make the trip, how she had shared the rigorous training. It had been a chance of a lifetime, 10 years of being together, time to meditate, to ponder the problems of life, of all humanity, of each other. They had thought soberly of it as an opportunity to make something of themselves, write a great play, solve a great problem. But they had never got around to that. The first year had been only the sheer delight of each other's company. He wondered if it would have ever changed. How fast it had gone. And now it was over, and the 9 years ahead loomed like a dark tunnel, large and forbidding. Clifton slammed the palms of his hands on the desk. Enough of that. He was captain of the ship, and he had duties. He could not spend his time in the past. There were things to do. He must keep himself occupied. He must not think of her. But he did. Even though the days stretched into weeks, he still found his steps faltering every time he walked past rooms where he had often looked for her. For one thing, there was the stereo room where Karen loved to spend leisure hours. He never saw much in stereo, but she seemed to enjoy it. And there was the music tape room, the massage parlor, the baths. She seemed to have a need of them, but all Clifton had ever needed was her. He passed the jammed clothes locker, filled with enough apparel to last her 10 years. He could not force himself to open it, though Karen seldom had opened it herself. She had made most of her own clothes, taking the material out of the huge storage bins. He found himself one day in her sewing room, a room she had converted from a nursery, storing the nursery stuff until such a time as it was needed, and installing her sewing machine and getting to work. They had joked about how, when they landed on Ostarpa, all of the clothes in the locker would still be intact because she so enjoyed fashioning her own. Once he had asked her what was to become of them. "We'll start a dress shop, darling," Karen had said quickly, as if she had already thought about it, which is the way she answered everything. "The sleeper women will want several changes right away." "You know," he replied, "I think I'll be your manager. Set you up. Karen West, Ostarpa's great dress designer. You'll have lots of business, and we'll make a fortune." "I'm not that good," she said, but her face glowed with joy. Even as he stood there, he could hear the words, as if they were said a moment ago, and he felt as if he should at any moment hear the click of her heels across the floor. And when she had entered the room, she'd say, "Clifton, what in the world are you doing here?" The transit service had been right. No man was an island. A man might be for a day, perhaps, or a week, or even longer, but not for 10 years. That's why the service had insisted a man and his wife, proven psychologically compatible, serve together as co-captains of each transit liner. So it wasn't right that he should spend the next 9 years a lonely man. Karen was gone. But what about those 100 people in the sleep locker? He needed someone, a companion, someone to talk to, someone to take Karen's place. Not a woman, of course. That would not be right, especially after Karen. There could be no other woman like Karen. Besides, suppose they didn't like each other. No, he said, standing in the sewing room and shaking his head. It must not be a woman. And then he brought himself back to reality. No sleeper had ever been awakened before the liner reached its destination. And no sleeper is going to be awakened on this trip, he said firmly. He had the power to wake any or all of them in an emergency, but his own personal emergency hardly constituted grounds for that. But suppose something happens to me, he reminded himself again. Who's going to carry on? And then he set his lips close together, turned on his heel, and left the sewing room. Nothing, he said aloud, is going to happen to you. That's why they put meadow centers on these ships. And he went to the place and spent the afternoon being checked over. He found himself in perfect health. For some reason, he was disappointed. The weeks passed slowly, but they did pass, and Clifton busied himself with exhaustive checks throughout the entire ship, interested himself in the stereos. They weren't so bad now that he had nothing else to do. Music tapes. He weeded out the ones he didn't like. Massages. He was pleased to discover they left him with a glow. Books. Funny how hard it was to read after the ease of stereo. Mathematics. How much he had forgotten. A few languages. German was still his hardest. Moods of writing. He just did not have the knack. Painting. He was always drawing machinery and wondering why. And found the image of Karen's laughing blue eyes, still there at the edge of his mind, though curiously distant, as if it were one of the stereos he had seen. Then the hunger started. He sat for long hours in the chill of the sleep locker and envied the sleepers there, row on row, all of them without a worry, without thought, trustful of him, confident he would get them through, none of them knowing Karen was dead and not caring, and he had an urge to wake them all and throw a furious party to end all parties. And sometimes he'd have a party there all by himself. And then he grew to hate them. When he did, he went to the Meadow Center, and this was erased, and he was made whole again. But the hunger got worse. Karen! Karen! And he finally wondered if it was really Karen he wanted, and the Meadow Center only made his hunger worse, and he cursed the efficiency of it. Then one day he got out the file of the sleepers, went through it from Abelard Johannes to Yardley Greta, and put the pictures in the stereo and saw what the sleepers looked like, and wondered which of them would prove the most companionable. Which man, that is, for a woman. Well, it would just not be right to awaken a woman. It would not look right in the log, for one thing, and he was sure all he needed was another person to talk to, and it might as well be a man. After all, man is a gregarious animal. If he had someone to talk to. He turned back through the file for Headstrom George, a pleasant-looking fellow of 30, which would have made him 5 years Clifton's junior, and in passing he came upon the picture of Portia Lavister again. He slipped the picture in the stereo and spent a long time looking at it. Quite a girl. Blonde, unlike Karen in that respect, and she wore her hair longer. Her eyes weren't as blue as Karen's, but her skin was darker. Sun? Karen didn't like the sun. It made her freckled. But this girl must have lived in it. The stereo was inadequate, however. It didn't tell how she laughed. Did she laugh? Was it pleasing? He put it down and looked at the record. Portia Lavister, 20 years old, 5'3", weight 109. He looked at the picture again. The weight was well distributed. He shuffled the picture back in the pile, tried to concentrate on Headstrom George, a logical choice among the single men, mechanical background. He peeked at the Lavister record again. The girl was a home economics expert. She'd do well on a starpa, or on the ship. Clifton sighed and shoved the file away. Only then did he realize how much he had missed Karen's cooking. The ship's electronic cookery was all right, but it left much to be desired. It had no personal touch. But to get back to Headstrom, how would the fellow act if he awakened him? Immediately he thought of the girl and wondered what she would be like. "Stop it," he admonished himself. "She's much too young." And he started going through looking at the other single women. The girl Lavister was clearly the nicest. Again he studied her. And again he forced himself to go back to the man. Finally, he decided to do nothing at present, left the office and started his rounds, determined to think of other things. Eventually he found himself in the sleep locker looking for number 33, Portia Lavister's compartment. He saw it and discovered it was no different from number 57, the compartment of George Hedstrom. The same black oblong box with the ribbon of red plastic where it was sealed near the top. It would be easy to activate the rollers, move it out of line and out of the meadow center, rip off the plastic and charge the contents with life. He wiped away a few dust motes and found that, to him, the box suddenly seemed different from the others. He was sweating. Later in the tape room, he listened to music and pondered the question. Suppose he awakened her and she proved to be anything but what he wanted. Sure, she was good-looking, but what about her age, her mannerisms? Would his 15 years turn her against him? There were 9 years left to Ostarpa. A lot could happen in 9 years, and she would eventually discover he was no ogre. She might even learn to love him. Why, she might even take Karen's place. He clicked off the music with a trembling hand, went to the bar, drew a double shot and ice. Karen, why did it have to happen to you? Forgive me, darling, for what I am about to do. Clifton watched the lard-like flesh become suffused with pink, saw the surge of color in the lips, the catch of breath and the resultant swell of breast. Then the eyelids flickered. A moment later, Portia Lavister was staring at him, and even as she did so, Clifton could see she did not understand what had happened. But when the vacant eyes came alive, the girl sat up, crossed her hands to her bare, hunched shoulders, and looked around frantically. "Don't be frightened," Clifton said, smiling. "You're still on the ship. You've just been awakened." "Thanks," she said without gratitude. "But I wasn't frightened. I was looking for something to put on." Oh, Clifton had forgotten about that. Now he blushed and opened a nearby drawer and withdrew a white gown. "Take this. It will have to do until I get you something else." She took it and held it to her nakedness, eyeing him coldly. He turned, heard her drop quietly to the floor. "Where are the others?" she asked, and he could hear the rustle of the gown as she put it around her. "And where can I pick up my clothes?" He turned to look at her, found her at the side of the room in front of its only mirror, inspecting her face and pushing her lush hair this way and that, and grimacing. "How long ago did we land? What's Ostarpa like?" She was lovely and not unlike Karen in manner, and it was going to be harder for him than he thought. "Was I the first or the last? Or was I in the middle? Just like me to be in the middle." She laughed a little, and he was glad to hear her, though her laughter was a little lower in pitch than Karen's. And then her eyes found his in the mirror, and they widened. She turned. "Why don't you say something? Is anything wrong?" Now she was frightened. She was very young, and he was glad to hear her voice, and he wanted to tell her so, but he knew she wouldn't understand, so he said only, "I want to talk to you." "What's happened?" Her eyes were panicky. "There are no others," he blurted out. "No others?" Her voice was shrill. He shook his head. "I awakened you because my wife died and I needed someone." It was blunt, but he wanted to be honest with her. "The others are still asleep out there." She stared with round eyes and a round open mouth, and her hands fell away from her face and were lost when the gown's long sleeves fell over them. I had to hear someone talk again," Cliff said haltingly. "I went through the file. I studied all the sleepers. I decided on you. I'm sorry if—" "How long?" she murmured, lips hardly moving. "Long?" he answered. "What do you mean?" And then he understood. "We're a little more than a year from Earth." Her moans startled and unnerved him. Her eyes closed and she slumped to the floor. When she did not move, he went to her, lifted her head. At once her eyelids fluttered and she saw him, and then her face darkened and she lashed out with tiny fists, scratching and crying. "It's not as bad as all that," he cried, half angry with her now, trying to stop her, clutching her flailing arms. He drew away quickly when she bit him. You beast!" she wailed. "You spoiled everything! Everything! Everything has been so carefully planned!" I know, he soothed. "Oh," she quavered, and she fell to the floor again, sobbing. Clifton got up, surveyed her weeping figure, a mound of white on the floor. Well, he thought, at least this is a change for me. And he felt rather foolish about what he had done. If only it had been a man. He could reason with a man. He turned in disgust and walked from the meadow center. She would change. After all, 9 years is a long time. No woman could cry 9 years. He smiled a little. Fiery little thing, isn't she? He told himself as he started his tour of the ship. He didn't find her in the meadow center when he returned. The white gown was not there either. It was a long time before he found her lying atop one of the compartments in the sleep locker. She was still clad in the gown, a gaunt, spiritless figure, her eyes staring at the low ceiling. "Miss Lavister," he said, "I know it was a shock to wake up this side of Ostarpa, but believe me, I intended no harm. If only you knew the loneliness." And he could not go on, remembering the emptiness of the days just past. She said nothing, only blinking her eyes, pale blue eyes and a white face. "If I'd known how upset you'd be, I'd have never awakened you," Clifton said bitterly. "If I could put you back to sleep now, I would." Now her face turned toward his, eyes icy in a withering glance. She rose, a firm press of breast against the white gown as she slid off the compartment. Clifton's heart quickened, but she ignored him and walked away. She looked like Karen sleepwalking, he thought. The next day he found her in the stereo room, dressed in one of Karen's gowns from the clothes locker, a thin pale blue dress that accented her small waist and blonde hair. She looked ever so much like Karen. He wondered where she had slept, if she had eaten. "Portia," he said, sitting in a nearby chair. She only sat, a still figure, staring ahead, her hair brushed back in a long sweep, glossy and smooth, and Clifton thought, "My God, but she's a beautiful thing." "Portia," he repeated, "I want to talk to you." What could he do with this girl? Was there no way to break through to her? Portia gave him a hateful glance and rose. He watched her, and his hunger was more than he could stand. "Please," he said desperately, "don't leave." She turned at the doorway and looked at him coldly. "You don't know what it means to lose your wife and have no one to talk to and have to decide what to do." He looked down at his hands embarrassedly. Why was he finding it so hard to talk to her? He felt his face coloring. I think I'd have gone mad if I hadn't awakened you. It wasn't a snap judgment, Portia. I didn't just pull your number out of a hat. You see..." He looked up. She wasn't there. He saw her in the hallway, her head down, contemplative and walking slowly. Catching up to her and walking beside her, he explained, "Suppose I'd have an accident like Karen did. Then none of you would ever land on Ostarpa. Somebody had to be awakened, Portia. Can't you understand that?" She gave no hint she knew he was there. He watched her in the massage room, unable to take his eyes off her as the soft, flexible arms stroked her flesh, and he said softly, "You say I spoiled everything, but I'd like you to think about that. On Ostarpa, you'd have to go to work right away. Be given your duty number, just like you had on Earth. On the ship, you've got 9 years to play with. 9 years of carefree life. You can do what you want, and nobody's going to say or do a thing to tell you to stop. Have you thought of that?" The moving arms were silent and smooth, and so was Portia. He followed her to the bath, but could not bring himself to enter there. He stayed beyond the filmy curtain and talked to her. "Sure, I know it was a surprise, awakening you like that, and I know you had in mind waking on Ostarpa, but being on the ship, the two of us, with all our wants taken care of, it has its advantages." And in the bar, with her eyes averted, drinking with her, he explained, "Oh, I'll admit there are records to keep, but I missed a few days after Karen died. Taking the whole 10 years into account, that won't make much difference. But suppose I became ill for a few days. Somebody's got to be on hand to see I get treatment at the Meadow Center. That's why you've got to come around, why you've got to start thinking about this thing." And finally, in the navigation room, he told her, "You can't go on like this. You've got to learn all about this ship. Why, if something happened to me, who'd awaken the sleepers? You will have to do that, Portia. You'd be the only one left. You've just got to be ready to take over, that's all there is to it. And don't think it's too hard, the ship does most of it. Automatic. Just a lever here, button there. I'll teach you all about it. Even landing the ship, you won't find it hard once you put your mind to it. Through it all, she remained aloof and unspeaking. A beautiful, silent thing with 2 accusing orbs for eyes, a lovely mouth with generous lips, much given to a look of disdain. Until one day. It was totally unexpected. Portia had taken over Karen's bedroom next to his, closing and locking the intervening door as if forever. He had gone to sleep in his room, with her still distant and uncommunicative in hers. He awakened to the smell of coffee and a cooking breakfast. He sat up quickly, wondering if Karen's death and the events that followed it had been a bad dream, and when he assured himself they had not, wondering if he had at last lost his mind. Clifton quickly dressed and entered the kitchen. Portia was there. She smiled at him. She said, "Good morning, Clifton." Just like Karen. He stood speechless, staring. "Breakfast is about ready." What's come over you?" he said numbly, both pleased and dumbfounded, his eyes relishing the lovely figure in one of Karen's sheerest nightgowns. "You were right," she said, tossing her head to bring the blonde hair away from her face and smiling. Her teeth were every bit as even and white as Karen's. "I just realized it. As you said, there are 9 years ahead of us. I might as well make the best of it." "I'm glad," he said warmly, and the memory of what she had been like during the days before was eclipsed by what she was now. "I was hoping you'd come around." "Come, sit down," she said, indicating the place set for him. The gleaming silver, the neat napkin, the steaming coffee in the cup. "Don't let it get cold." Karen used to say that. And then he thought, that's a mistake. I mustn't mention Karen ever again. But Portia seemed not to have noticed, and she seemed so much like her now. "I got tired of eating by myself," Portia said, sitting opposite him at the table, and she stole a sly look as she said, "And I'm afraid I acted badly." "Not at all," Clifton said gallantly. "I understand how you felt. It's just taken a little time, that's all." He started eating, but his eyes were on her in the transformation of eyes that were no longer cold, lips that weren't scornful anymore. "Pity the poor sleepers," she said, laughing. "They can't enjoy a breakfast like this." "Do you suppose," he said, endeavoring to keep the talk in the same vein, "that any might rise up when they smell that coffee?" He inhaled ecstatically. There's nothing like it." "I hope I never make it that strong," and she giggled. With a shock, he found his knee touching hers. He drew away, wondering if it had been accidental. Later, when he tried to kiss her, she turned away, murmuring, "Not yet, Cliff. Give me time. It's so sudden." He obeyed, turned his attention to other things. He could afford to wait. After all, there were 9 years. A day or so. What did it matter? It was more than a week before he managed to kiss her for the first time. And then it was nothing like Karen's kisses. But immediately he felt he was asking too much of Portia too soon. There'd be time for teaching. They lost themselves in the intricacies of the ship, covering its complete operation, the records that had to be kept, the functions of each section, the matter of awakening the sleepers, which, Clifton explained, was quite simple since the Meadow Center did most of the work, but still demanded certain procedures and precautions and delicate adjustments. He even taught her how to use the communications system that would become operable within a few months of Ostarpa. In all, they spent a good 2 months studying together every facet of the ship. "It's so complicated," she said in an awed voice. She squeezed his hand she had taken to holding. "But you're an awfully good teacher, Cliff." "And you're the loveliest student I ever had," he said, squeezing back and drawing closer to kiss her. "Cliff," she said, drawing away and giggling. "You're always joking. I'll bet I'm the only student you ever had." "Well," he said lamely, I hate to admit it, but you are." And then they both laughed. At length they finished everything he could show her on the ship. Then he brought up what had been on his mind ever since the day he awakened her. "Portia," he said gravely, "I'm captain of this ship, and as such I have invested in me the power to perform marriage." Portia laughed. "You're always saying things so seriously, Cliff. So pontifically. Is that the word?" "I'm serious, Portia." "I know." She laughed a little more, then straightened her face. "I didn't mean to offend you." "You're always laughing at me. Why?" "I don't mean to." "I want to marry you, Portia." "I know." And instantly her eyes were grave. "I've known for a long time." "I've wanted you since the day you first looked at me." "I've known that, too." "It was all I could do to—" "You've been more than kind, Cliff." "When, darling, when can I marry you?" She looked up. "Tomorrow?" His heart leaped. "Marry you tomorrow?" She nodded. "Tomorrow." Was there something odd in her look? He couldn't decide. When Clifton went to bed that night, his heart sang. The years ahead no longer seemed appalling and interminable. How they'd spend them. The sewing room. It could always be changed back into a nursery. Portia had shown no interest in sewing, so he'd just store Karen's stuff. Perhaps somebody would find use for it when they landed on Ostarpa. It wasn't unusual for captains and their wives to have a half-dozen kids during transit. He went to sleep with the sound of children's feet echoing about the halls and corridors of the ship, and when he dreamed of the marriage, it was, oddly, Karen he was marrying. He awakened with a start. On this morning there was no welcome aroma of coffee. At first he thought perhaps he was too early, but it was time. Portia was probably so excited she was all off schedule. Clifton was careful on this morning. He took his bath, toweled himself until his skin tingled, used his deodorant sparingly, gave himself a close shave. The part in his hair was never straighter. Dressing himself in a clean-pressed suit, he strolled from his bedroom. Portia was not in the kitchen. He walked to her bedroom. The bed had been made, but no Portia. Where the devil had she gone? He started walking about the ship, searching first here and then there. Of course, not in stereo, not on this day. Massage? No. Bath? Not there. Tape? Same. She was nowhere to be found. Then he recalled the funny look in her face the previous night. It meant something. Suicide? Frantic now, he went to both waste chutes. Neither gave evidence of having been opened. Still. An hour later, he returned, a bewildered and disconsolate man, to his office. Portia was there. With her was a man. He was George Hedstrom. Clifton could only sink back against the wall and look at the two of them. The Portia he had never seen so radiant. George, a dark, handsome fellow who wore a quizzical look. Clifton was shocked to see they were holding hands. "Captain," George said in a friendly way, rising to his full 6 feet, "Portia tells me—"
"I'm sorry, Cliff," Portia interrupted hastily. "George is my fiancé. We were to be married on Ostarpa, but as long as you—"
"Tomorrow," she had said. The two figures blurred before him. The room reeled, and Clifton clutched the doorway for support. Karen, I've been bewitched. This girl, I thought she was you. I should have known." "Let me help you." Clifton struck out at the dark head of hair, hid it somewhere. Karen, can you hear me?" He stumbled out of the room and down the corridor. Karen, where are you?" He found the ventral waste chute. He was in it, heard the door click behind him. Now they'd never get him out. Never take him away from his Karen. The sides of the chute were closing in. It was hot, but it was cool where Karen was. "Wait, Karen!" he cried. And as he inched his way down the chute, he hoped he wasn't too late, hoped she'd forgive him. There was the outer door. On the other side was coolness and Karen. Dear, beautiful, lovely Karen. The real Karen. With a surge of joy, he held to the smooth sides of the shaft and raised his foot. He plunged it down unerringly against the door. It burst open with a deadly whoosh of air. The door clicked closed. The chute was empty.
Recording by Ali M. The Annals of Aardvark by Harlan, Ellison. Chapter 1. The Entrance. Come on in, won't you? You can sit right down there in that rocking chair. Oh, you saw the sign on the door and wanted to ask me about Aardvark, did you? Well, I guess I'm the best person to tell you about him, since I was with him from the moment he entered the country. Do you want to hear from there, or from the real beginning? Well, okay, I'll tell you about the start when he met the Valkyries. You see, aardvarks can live only in the warmest places, so when the aardvark got lost in the Swiss Alps, he was very uncomfortable. Don't ask me how an aardvark got to the Swiss Alps or what he was doing there in the first place. He's never told anyone, except maybe the Valkyries. Anyhow, stumbling around in the freezing cold, he got lost, but good. Just as he was about to give up and say farewell, cruel world, he stumbled upon an ice crypt. Stumbled, he ran into it and knocked out 2 teeth. This crypt, which was set in the side of one of the glaciers, was not an ordinary one, for frozen within its icy walls, rent-free, were 2 Valkyries and a large elephant. Even the elephant was unusual. He was the sole owner, the Valkyries obviously had no use for one, of a handsome brown handlebar mustache, nicely waxed and glistening. The aardvark, who was inquisitive, as are all great men, strolled up to the ice crypt as nonchalantly as a freezing aardvark could, and dying of hunger, put forth an exploratory tongue and licked the ice. To his amazement, the ice was lemon-flavored. Wait a minute, I'll tell you why it was lemon-flavored, but first let me tell you what happened. Knowing full well the consequences of licking open this age-old ice pack, but racked with hunger, the aardvark proceeded to lick open the crypt. After several minutes of lightning-like licking, the aardvark sated his hunger and in the process freed the Valkyries. The Valkyries were forever grateful and proceeded to show the aardvark this by bursting into Wagnerian opera, complete with flowing braids. After the preceding formality had been dispensed with, introductions went around and the aardvark found out the fact, which is of practically no use to anyone, that the Valkyries' names were Olga and Katanya Schwartz. Very old lineage, this name. The elephant, who had been sitting by, looking very bored about the whole thing, was named Reuben. The Valkyries, it seems, were delivering a package of lemon-flavored jello to the cook in Valhalla, and en route had gotten frozen in the ice. The elephant was their mode of conveyance, since all the good horses had a day off and went to the people races at Lowalia. The aardvark heard all of this in a rather detached way, for you know most aardvarks can neither talk, write, nor understand human language. The Valkyries, who perceived this deficiency, were contemplating giving the aardvark some of their Valkyrie local number 86112 magic, patent pending, when the recipient in question suddenly turned a lovely shade of aquamarine, shivered, and dropped over, frozen solid. This solved the problem very effectively. They worked their second-hand magic on the fellow, and when he awoke, well, there was a complete change in him. This was the exit of Aardvark, Boy Nothing, and the entrance of Cassius Quagmire Aardvark, Man of the World. Chapter 2. Mass Exodus. After the Valkyries had revived Cassius with the aid of a bouquet consisting of a quartet of red flowers in liquid form, they placed him and themselves upon the back of the elephant Reuben, who it was found was permanently grounded after 3,000 or 4,000 years of disuse, and proceeded to the almost obscure town of Ihohahi, Switzerland, where they intended to settle down. But the people of the town, upon seeing the apparition of a large elephant with a mustache carrying 2 beautiful girls and a strange animal, wanted to burn the aardvark and his companions at the stake, thinking them a figment of their imaginations. The elephant did not care for this in the least, and rearing back on his hind legs, proceeded to tell the townsfolk so, much to their dismay. In large groups they immediately depopulated the Swiss village. Cassius, the aardvark, finding himself alone in the middle of a deserted town with a mustachioed elephant and 2 Valkyries, decided that here they were not appreciated, and made preparations for leaving the country. In a deserted haberdashery he found a fine, warm English tweed, a top hat, white gloves, a white bow tie, and a pair of lavender earmuffs, which he quickly donned. The elephant was equipped with a can of mustache wax and a muffler, while the Schwartz sisters doffed their filmy negligee-type goddess gowns and donned 2 lovely business suits. Then, well-clothed and happy, the elephant replaced his traveling companions upon his back and calmly swam the Atlantic Ocean to arrive at the United States of America, where the Aardvark's appearance was destined to cause a stir and tremor in the daily life of every American. Chapter 3. It's a Bargain. A warning of the thing to sweep the country shortly was evidenced when the mustachioed elephant Reuben came lumbering through the water in the New York harbor. People from miles around who got wind of the news, he was a very smelly elephant, rushed to the docks to watch, or climbed to the tops of buildings with binoculars, and when Reuben climbed ashore on Ellis Island, the city was thrown into a panic. It seems that Cassius began conferring at once with 2 of the immigration officers about entrance into the country. This was flatly refused by the officials, who cited a weak clause in the handbook which excluded all uncivilized beings, and anyone could see that Cassius was uncivilized. Who ever heard of wearing lavender earmuffs with an English tweed? When his traveling companions heard this, they were all for hurling the immigration officers headfirst into ye old New York harbor. Right about there is where I came in. Yeah, good old Charlie Smirts, that's me. I had been waiting on the island for a shipload of animals from Africa, and being a producer of some renown, saw the latent possibilities in the appearance of these, and I use the term loosely, people. I had just finished a show on Broadway that had run 3 years and was just getting together an animal circus to tour the country. But when I saw this aardvark in an English tweed with a top hat, tie, and ivory-top cane, a mustached elephant wearing a muffler, and 2 of the most gorgeous dames in the world, I knew that this was something a little unusual. I was sure of it when I saw that the aardvark was wearing lavender earmuffs. Sauntering casually over to where the Aardvark and his companions were sitting, I introduced myself, and in a low voice related to them the fact that if they would consent to signing a contract, I would personally see that they were inside the country before morning. The Aardvark gives me the cold eye at first, and then says, "If you promise, and write it out in this contract, that we are not to appear in any sideshow type things, we might consent." Before the fellow could twitch his short brown tail, I had pulled out my Foster pen that writes under water, air, ink, blood, and money, and was writing in the clause he mentioned. Then he signed the contract, and so commenced the partnership of Smirts, Aardvark, Schwartz, and Reuben, Inc. Chapter 4. The Carbuncle Voyage. After the signing of the contract, Cassius and his companions retired to the harbor to wait till I had made the arrangements. Late that night, very late, about 5 o'clock, a small tug pulled up to the island, and out came one Hawser Dawson. I can truthfully say that Hawser is the moldiest-looking animal to ever set foot upon dry land, or wet water, for that matter. He is so filthy that his clothes stand up by themselves when he takes them off at night. And the smell! Whew! Hawser Dawson smells like Mrs. Murphy didn't get home with the eggs in time. He is dirty, smelly, and dumb besides, but he is loyal and one of the best tugboat captains that ever tripped on a 2-inch line. We'd arranged to get the Aardvark and his buddies into the country under cover, but I had forgotten to mention to Hawser how big the group was. When Hawser saw the elephant, he almost fainted. His ship, which was as leaky as Stalin's head, wouldn't carry that load. It could hardly carry Hawser himself. So we arranged to hang the Aardvark and the elephant under the ship while the Valkyries and myself rode upstairs. But not only did Dawson get paid twice as much as he should have, he wanted the Aardvark and Reuben the elephant to work their way in. He whispered something to Cassius and Reuben, and then came aboard. When the elephant and our hero were slung under the ship, the leaky tub sank so low into the water that it was wetter on the bridge than it was under the ship. We got under way shortly, and as we sailed around cover of darkness we heard a weird sound. It was a systematic metallic wonking under the boat. When we asked Dawson what the noise was, he told us that the Aardvark and Reuben were working their way over by cleaning barnacles off the bottom of the tugboat with their teeth. I almost fainted when I heard this. Our future star, the brightest new personality in years, scraping barnacles. Oh no. After breaking a steel pipe over Dawson's head, we got the Aardvark into the ship and started chipping the remnants of his work from his bicuspids. It was about this time that we got into the small dock that Hawser had told us would be waiting. We dragged the slightly defunct sea captain out of the ship, got Reuben out from under, and proceeded to enter the United States of America, which, as you know, has been renamed since by some people, the United States of Aardvark. One of the reasons is because of what happened in the Drunken Cockroach nightclub. Oh, that was a queer night. It happened on the same evening we got into the States. Chapter 5. In the Drunken Cockroach. We got the Aardvark settled quickly in a hotel near the center of town, and then decided to go out and eat someplace. Hawser Dawson wanted to go along till he got his money, and since he wanted it in cash and the Bigs didn't open till the next day, we decided to let him tag along. There was but one stipulation, that he take a bath. This almost broke Stinky's heart, but he consented, and when he met us in the lobby a few hours later, he was, as he termed it, disgustingly filthy clean. Reuben was looking quite elegant in a rented tux, which was a size 67. The Schwartz girls were absolutely ravishing in their 2 evening gowns that were strapless, hemless, backless, topless, bottomless, frontless, and with a plunging neckline. But the really dashing one was Cassius Q. Aardvark. He was decked out in a conservative green and red suit with a yellow tie, spats, a cane, top hat, and the perennial lavender earmuffs. We could never understand it, but the newspapers said the next day that about 50 cases of color blindness and shock were brought into the hospital, raving about an Aardvark with a top hat and earmuffs. That was really a queer night. We started out at the Stork Club. Sherm Billingsley had gotten wind of the Aardvark and had a special room reserved with a wall knocked out for the elephant Reuben. The men were practically fawning all over the Schwartz Valkyries, who calmly broke champagne bottles over their heads and continued to stay by their erstwhile pal, the Aardvark. After we had gotten well placed, I looked at the Aardvark. He was holding sway like a royal sultan, complete with dancing girls. The young blade was surrounded by the chorus line and was having a rough time with them, but he had eyes only for the Schwartz sisters. They sat there exchanging guttural sounds. After we got finished at the Stork, we took in rapid succession the Mocambo, the 21, 22, 23, 24, and 25 clubs, the Noir Pansy Club, and the High, Low, Top, and Homburg Hat Clubs. About 9 o'clock, we were just about pooped, when we noticed that we had lost Hawser someplace. It was quite a relief to us, as he had poured the contents of a potted palm all over himself at the Noir Pansy Club to make himself feel more at home, and he had begun to reacquire the odor that was peculiar only to his body. It was then that Cassius remarked, "Look at the neighborhood we're in. This is lower than low." Truer than true were his words. We were in a neighborhood that looked like the inside of a shell-shocked oyster shell. We were surrounded by broken-down houses and buildings that looked as though they had been old when Moxie's army was chewing on rattles. At the end of the street that we were on was a building that was a little better, just a little. By better, I mean it was standing. There was a sign over the door that proceeded to tell us in no uncertain terms that this was the Drunken Cockroach nightclub. I was all for turning back, as was Cassius Q. But the Valkyries, Olga, and Catania, who had consumed a great deal of wine, they learned how in Valhalla, they told us, ran on ahead and without a backward hiccough vanished into the rickety building which threatened at any moment to fall on their heads. With a shrug to the gods of chance, Reuben, Cassius, and myself proceeded to the spirit holstery, or as you choose, beer parlor. The inside of the Drunken Cockroach was worse than the outside. It looked like a nightmare by Dali on a night when he had run out of brushes and had started using his feet. The bar, which ran across the back of the smoke-filled room, was of a seasick green color, while the walls were a burnt umber tinged with beige. The floor was ornamented with a 5-pointed star that showed several crawly-type animals, such as the kind that go bump in the night. They were of various hues and were, in all, quite sickening. The bartender was the worst. A small sign above the door related to the fact that he was Oliver Absinthe. He was not only repulsive, he was nauseating. A large bald head encased in folds of pink flesh was what surmounted the largest bay window in the country outside of Reuben's. He was wearing an apron that showed the demise of many a martini. There were also spaghetti, dirt, milk, coffee, and gravy stains on the apron, besides a group of green blotches that I couldn't quite place. It looked like the remains of last week's spinach. Have you ever heard a sick hippo tell you about his operation? Well, if not, try to imagine how it would sound, since that was what this fellow's voice sounded like. "What's your pleasure?" he said. "Nothing much," I answered, looking for a quick way to get out if it was needed. We seated ourselves in a booth next to the Valkyries, who were fast at work guzzling beer. Reuben just stood with one foot on the brass rail, which at the application of his weight, bent. He ordered another double Scotch, and in one gulp downed it. It was then that the elephant began screeching in an unelephant-like way, and kicking himself in his more than ample posterior. We started shaking him by the trunk and asked him what the trouble was, and he yelled that the last drink was one too many. He was seeing pink people. After this outburst, I returned to the booth to see that the Aardvark was gone. My attempts at locating him were halted suddenly by the screaming of another person. It seems as though that evening was open season on howling. The person yelling was Oliver Absinthe, the bartender, who was yelling at Cassius, who was in turn yelling and alternately beating with his fists and a cuspidor, a slot machine that was not acting in the way Cassius expected it to. With a resounding howl, the machine exploded, showering colored lights, nickels, pieces of wire, and an aardvark at me. The last was caught by Catania Schwartz in one hand while downing a beer with the other. Absinthe was jumping up and down behind its seasick green bar, while the rather shady-looking patrons were scrambling for the nickels. Absinthe, who had been systematically withdrawing each strand of hair from his chest, his head was bald, let loose a barrage of verbal abuse that even singed my ears. Besides that, he let loose a string of whiskey bottles that sailed across the room and felled, one at a time, the clientele on the opposite side. The bodies began piling up as Oliver the bartender became not only bald on his head, but upon his barrel chest also. I, for one, dove for safety under the table, and there was pleasantly surprised to find the half-pickled Olga Schwartz still swilling spirits. I raised my head in time to see the Aardvark swinging across the nearly ruined room on the trunk of Reuben, who was sitting in the middle of the floor, hitting himself, and repeating, "Go away, go away," giving out a sound like Tarzan with a gout. He flew through the murky, smoke-filled air, and with a sidearm that would do Bob Feller credit, hit the still bellowing bartender a resounding clunk in the cranium. Absinthe fell like a pulled ox. By this time there was much yelling and hollering by everyone within a radius of 2 blocks. In the distance we heard the mournful wail that signals the entrance of the blue-coated gendarmes. With a significant look we aroused Reuben, whose mustache had begun to droop sadly, climbed upon his back, and amidst the clatter and crash of beer bottles, escaped the drunken cockroach nightclub. Like I said, what a night! Chapter 6. None so blind as love. These were the times. The good times that I still remember as I rock back and forth before my fire. Eh? What's that? Oh, yeah, less ruminating and more expostulating. That's a good one, Sonny, but don't be getting flip with me. Old smirts can still tan the hide off of any young whippersnapper like you. Well, anyhow, I had been making plans to put Cassius and his band into a super colossal extravaganza that would outthorn Ziegfeld. It was about 6 months after that mad night at the Cockroach that rehearsals were over, the show was prepared, and the public waited with bated breath and fishhooks to see what had been the most highly touted production in a decade. Then that night, I can remember it as if it were 12 years ago. As a matter of fact, it was 12 years ago. The Marquis blazoned their messages to the crowd that had formed a line 14 times around the block in front of the garden. New York had turned out en masse, and, as I said, those Marquis. The Aardvark Follies, starring Cassius Q. Aardvark, with Reuben, Olga, and Katanya Schwartz, Milton Berle, Lawrence Oliver, Lionel Birdbath, and others. An extravaganza to outganza all extras. Standing room only. How do you like that? SRO signs up and we hadn't even opened yet. Well, when that curtain rose and the Aardvark came out on the backs of 70 raging rhinoceri, the crowd went into fits. And when the Schwartz girls danced the dance of the 8.5 by 11 Kleenex, you could have sworn that the rafters would buckle. And when Reuben did his imitation of the president, that imitation of maybe, the garden sounded as though 12 billion Zulus were singing, "Tides in, smirts out." 13 weeks went by with 2 shows a day, except when Cassie got tired and the money was rolling in. We had to save a box seat each night for impellitteri, otherwise the cops would have closed us down. It wasn't exactly blackmail, I don't blame him a bit, that was one hell of a show. However, all good things must come to an end. We had signed on a pair of kids named, what in the... Oh, yeah, that's it. Martin, for some fill-in stuff tween acts. We had to let him go eventually. We found him carrying on with one of the hat check girls, name of Monroe or something. Oh well. And Cass had taken off a week to go down to Monte Carlo for some sun and air. That year, the rage of the Riviera were 2 3-headed girls named Sally Louise Lee Munglefoots and Gertrude Alice Roberta Hitzlongle. They called them SLL and GAR for short. And when they saw Cassius, well, it went on for 3 gay, mad days till I sent a wire back to New York to tell Olga and Katanya to get down to La Ville de Mazuma to save Cassboy from what might develop into a septangle. SLL and GAR were entertaining Cass at a party one night, drinking borscht from his sneakers, when who should drop in through a skylight from a D6 but the Schwartz sisters, who immediately began laying about them with a pair of 2-handed broadswords. 15 minutes and 90 gallons of blood later, the place was cleared of all sentience save Cass, myself, the Schwartz girls, and a drunken cockroach. Something familiar about that boy, who immediately staggered to the seashore, fell, and was poisoned to death. Cassius, baking in such munificent attention, and also regaling himself with the beauty of the 2 girls, immediately realized how unhappy he really was in civilization. He pleaded on bended bodies for forgiveness, and upon being received warmly by Olga and Katanya, made plans for leaving his culture. I didn't try to stop him. What would have been the use? I'd made enough to retire, Cass had seen the world, Reuben had been adopted by some destitute family named DuPont who wanted a house pet, and all in all, the only drawback was that I hated to see him go. But finally, he chartered a plane, something about a sacred cow, I believe, and took off back to where he felt he was home with the 2 Schwartz Valkyries. Yep, that's the last anyone ever saw of them. That is, till now. Huh? Where are they? And what am I doing here? Well, you see, I didn't figure on taxes after the show, and I was broke in 2 months. That's what I'm doing here. Huh? Where are they? Well, just step right up, ladies and gentlemen. For only 25 cents, I'm going to show you a real, authentic, for sure Aardvark. and 2 girls frozen into a block of lemon-flavored ice, right here in the heart of the Swiss.
Recording by Kelly Hess. Before the Ice Age by Alfred Fritchey. Forward. In reading this most amazing yet truthful story, please remember that I am not a trained writer. I am only a tunnel and mine worker, and I've written down the things as I've seen them. Therefore, kindly excuse my English as well as grammar, as I am aware that neither is perfect. 1. Up on a certain job, they were putting a tunnel through a granite mountain. It was a big job, and they were working day and night. They had cut through a vein of water, a vein of onyx, and a vein of silver. The silver especially was particularly beautiful, being in the spreading out, branched form of an immense tree. However, the lead was not followed, for the tunnel was a power tunnel designed to hold water, and as time was a big factor and the expense of the project was colossal, such byplays as silver mines were unimportant. Besides, it was the expert opinion that the silver tree in the tunnel was a mere pocket. But they did strike something in that mountain that was no byplay. It was neither gold nor diamonds, though in the opinion of a certain professor it was a more remarkable find than either. And it halted the tunnel advance for 3 shifts, day and night. What then was the find? A find which made Tunnel Number 10 in Bald Mountain so celebrated? Let us review the affair. As I have remarked, they worked 2 shifts, a day and a night one. This left an interval between, as the shifts were 8 hours each. This interval was split into 2 parts for a purpose, one part being allotted to each shift. Drilling as they did during the working hours, and putting in the charges just before quitting time, it was customary for the shift boss of the retiring shift to set off all the explosions he had arranged immediately after work. This left a period for the air to clear before another shift came on. Of course, it was necessary to keep an accurate count on the shots heard. Otherwise, the next shift going in was in danger of their lives. That's why the shooting was allotted to the shift bosses. Even with such precautions, it was not always possible to be certain of the tabulation. For in spite of efforts to prevent it, 2 shots sometimes came at the same time. A very loud blast was occasionally put down as 2 shots, but this was mere guesswork. And when lives depended on it, it was the worst of judgment to come to such a conclusion. There are persons of the opinion, however, that the explosion which wrecked Tunnel Number 10 was not due to an unexploded shot. How else, then, do they explain it? They claim there was some kind of an explosive in the chamber which was revealed by the blast. However, let us observe the shift working at the time of the explosion and see what we may see. This particular night, Dan Parker was the shift boss. Daly of the day gang had reported all okay, so Parker and his crew rode into the tunnel with no apprehension whatever. This fellow Parker was a red-faced man, jovial, puffy, and fat. He wheezed continually as if he had the asthma, claimed he got it from being gassed in the World War. He was a good shift boss, tolerant, resourceful, and good-natured. This night there was a fellow named Reno Bob as one of the miners. They worked 3 miners with each shift, each miner having a helper. Then, too, there was a crowd of muckers, fellows who shoveled up the mud, dirt, and rock into the miniature train which hauled out the debris. Reno was not a regular night shift man. He belonged to Daly's gang. But a rock had fallen on one of the miners, and the management, wishing to lose no time and expecting a new man every minute, had shifted Bob over to Parker's crowd. This Reno Bob was built like Hercules. He had a dark, saturnine face and coal-black eyes, a very devil of a handsome fellow. He was not especially pleased to hear he was put on the night shift, for he had been in the habit of taking Mrs. Parker, Dan's wife, to the movies down at the pavilion in the evening, and this change would cut him out of such diversion. However, this was not unknown to Dan. Reno was a welcome visitor to the Parker home, whether he worked days or nights, being a great friend of the night shift boss. Mrs. Parker was a very pretty woman with a flood of yellow hair and fascinating green eyes. No one would have ever thought her likeness was behind that thin stone wall which Parker and Reno bob-faced when they came on shift that fatal night. But so it was. The story is almost unbelievable for weirdness. Talk about King Tut and his tomb. His place wasn't in it with what they found up on the Bald King Mountain. And so many things happened afterward that couldn't be explained by any modern methods. But I anticipate my story. You see, the watchman at the tunnel mouth always gave the new shift coming on the result of the last boss's tabulation. This night, he merely said, "Everything to the good." Now, if Daly had missed a count, he should have said so. No one would have blamed him for that. That's merely human nature. Not always, to be sure. Anyhow, Daly had orders to report so if he hadn't caught a full count, and he certainly failed to carry out orders. The new shift rode to their working place in a long string of dinky cars, run by a fellow whose long legs were nearly in his face as he drove the tiny electric locomotive which pulled the train. This fellow's name was Matt, probably an abbreviation for Matthew, but he is of no interest in the story. Anybody else could have pulled the train. I know I could. They came to the place which halted them, the place where the fallen wall surface was piled up on the tracks. Of course, the muckers all had high hip boots. So had the miners. They had to have. There was water in the tunnel. No river of water, but great drops which oozed languidly out. And the floor was as slippery as the devil. The night crew jumped from the cars, not carelessly but with one hand on the side. Otherwise, he's liable to be on his seat in the mud, sprawled out and slightly damp to the skin. For the place was usually sopping wet. It was a humid, stifling place to work in spite of a ventilating fan which theoretically cleared away the foul air. But the muckers began shoveling, not briskly and as if their lives depended on it, but with the measured ease of men accustomed to the shovel and also to mines, a stroke about half between that of a harp and a Mexican. Still, they had Mexicans working here too, but they were not like the ones I refer to. So the miners set their jackhammers and began pounding into solid rock. Ever see a jackhammer? Well, it's like a long drill, much larger, of course, than what a dentist uses. It's worked the same, both of them use electricity, but the jackhammer gets his from a longer distance. Still, I don't know. Maybe the power the dentist uses comes from the same mountain. The muckers had cleared away most of the fallen matter, and the jackhammers had drilled 1 or 2 holes already. It seems Dan Parker had stopped by Reno to ask him about the show down at the pavilion. He says so himself, and it's reasonable. It isn't Reno tells it. Reno's gone fluey. Parker says he had just shouted in Reno's ear about the show, heard Reno reply something about love's reward, that was the show, you see, and had just turned away when the blast came. It must have been Reno's jackhammer, for he's the only one went fluey. Besides, any other man who had drilled into dynamite would have known it. Shocks like that ain't forgotten. Well, the blast caught them all. There was a mess, I tell you, in that tunnel. I wasn't there myself, but I heard Johnny Tinker tell what he saw. Johnny said it was worse'n a plane bomb in the World War. Johnny was in that war, so he ought to know. Well, there was that blast. The train driver, Matt, you recall, who was just running a string of loaded cars out, caught the sound at the tunnel's mouth, and he had an inkling of what it meant. He shifted his string, caught up a bunch of empties, took on the watchman, and raced into the tunnel. But he had to stop before he came to the place. There was some kind of an odor neither of them ever smelt before. This odor made the air almost impossible to breathe. They had to come out again. By this time, there was a crowd of men about the entrance. You see, they never shot their blasts off at night. It was always morning when the night crowd came off shift. So anyone who heard the blast on that particular night knew something unusual had happened. Seeing that Matt and the watchman were stopped by foul air, the emergency apparatus was brought out, and several of the men being rigged up, Matt forever lost his chance to see the result of the explosion, for Charlie Bates took his place. Of course, the lights were put out of commission by this shock. Weren't usually, though, which only goes to show it was no ordinary blast. So they had to take in torches, you know the kind. They call them carbide, fill them with a white powder, and run in water. Then they light a little hole where the gas comes through. They're not bad lights. When they got up to the wreckage, they found only debris and darkness. Flashing their torches toward the wall they were cutting through, they saw a great jagged hole exposed by the blast going into a cavity. But although this surprised them, they were not there to explore cavities. They were there to save lives, and they got to work looking for the missing men. One by one, they pulled them out. 4 of them were dead, and 1 man was permanently locoed. That was Reno. I guess anybody would have been locoed who ran into a similar bit of shaking up. I know I wouldn't want to. The rest of the night crew were okay. They were unconscious for a time, but they came around nicely. Harry Getz says he dreamed of chasing ostriches down in South Africa. If he did, I'll bet he never caught any of them, for Harry is too slow even to catch a cold. Well, they knocked off work for the day, let the air in for the tunnel to ooze off its poisonous fumes. Next night, they went in again. Not the regular crew, remember. Men ain't no fools. Most of the regular crew who were capable of moving on their legs were down the hill by this time. You'd be surprised the way a few dead men will change the working crew of a mine. But it does. Parker still was along, however. When a man's married, he can't just go and jump his job because of some unexpected explosion. The job of supporting a family is a more serious affair often than even TNT blasts. And you know, there's some blasts. 2. They came to the ragged hole. They poked in their torches. Finally, Parker, who was a brave man, being as he was in the World War, went into the cavern and explored. He came back and his face was white. "For God's sake," said he to Dick Combs, "come in here and see if you see what I see." In the cavern in which Parker and Combs found themselves was a heap of skeletons clustered near a peculiar, wonderfully embossed little bronze box, the lid of which had been broken open, probably by the explosion. This lid had a tiny hole, the mouth of an octopus head, with which it was adorned. The cavern curved away from the line toward which the tunnel was being driven, so that work was only temporarily halted because of the find. But at the other end, along a walk of leopard-spotted agate, was a figure in mosaic which held them spellbound. It was of heroic size and seemed to represent a woman's head on an immense snail's shell. The woman's eyes were large rubies, and her headdress, somewhat like the Grecian statues of their goddesses, was a helmet made up of innumerable flakes of moonstone. The woman's face seemed remarkably lifelike, colored as it was with some shining enamel which seemed to match the glow of health. Dick Combs said it was enough to startle one, the head standing out as it did away from the wall and seeming so real. But what was the explanation of the skeletons? No one could guess. It seemed a mystery beyond the knowledge of simple miners and those who know even less than miners, the weak-headed muckers. Parker and Combs returned, and work was resumed. However, work was immediately halted when Dan went to the mouth of the tunnel and telephoned headquarters. That's where they showed good sense. How'd they know but it might be something of great importance? Old Addington, the superintendent, certainly deserved credit for stopping work till some of those university guys had a peep. Remember, this was in a solid mountain, and heaven knows how long it might have been there. Professor Eddy came down. He seemed like a very capable man to us people, whose only glimpse of education is the schoolmarm up at number 2 and the parson at number 7. He could talk about Eocene and Pliocene till he had us all woozy. I've studied a few of the scenes myself, being interested in geology, but I never had any Plesiosaurus or Bronchosaurus eating out of my hand like that guy had. He knew everything that was to be known and some which wasn't. Well, he went up to the hole in the tunnel wall, gave a look at the snail lady, and gasped. Even his expert knowledge of such things failed to classify her. He was flabbergasted. He was nonplussed. He was absolutely speechless, something queer in a professor. He sent for a crony of his back at the big school where they both taught, and there never before was such English used as these two delvers in the ground used when they looked in the place exposed by Reno's shell. Professor Eddy explained the pile of skeletons in the old cavern in front of the snail lady as persons sacrificed to her. Then Professor Monk took a peep at the little bronze box and allowed his colleague had a shot of dope. He said, "The box is in ancient Aramaic, and the inscription thereon says that it contains a volatile poison which shall guard the inner chamber ever from profanation." Professor Eddy says, "How does it come we are here?" This, of course, was a poser for the man who read Aramaic, but some of the boys came to the fellow's assistance and told of the terrible smell immediately after the explosion. "That explains it perfectly," contended Monk. "This was a protection against vandals only till an explosion occurred. It was a very delicate apparatus, probably an invention which has never since appeared on the earth. And the blast broke the small quantity liberation of the gases and made the poisonous odor which was remarked just after the catastrophe." I must say Monk reasoned much better than his name sounded. Then the two savants went back and looked at the snail lady. "What do you make out of it?" asked Eddy. "It represents patience," was the reply. That fellow Monk was always good at replies. He seemed to have accumulated a lot of sense with his years. However, Professor Eddy didn't quite like the interpretation of his colleague. "Your mistake is natural," he said. "I don't acknowledge I have made one, yet," replied the redoubtable Monk. "Then I will show you," remarked Professor Eddy. "Your solution is merely a superficial observation. If you study the hybrid's form closely, you will find a snail shell is not a snail shell, but the shell of the nautilus. Now, the nautilus, from earliest times, has symbolized a rising spiritually. This figure faces a death chamber because the woman's head on the nautilus shell symbolizes resurrection. Am I right, my dear professor?" Dr. Monk admitted that should excavation disclose another chamber behind, Professor Eddy's theory might be the correct one. "What is your theory for the reason such a high spot was selected for the tomb?" asked he then, with the look of a man who has propounded a poser. "High spots were the sacred ones," answered Eddy, the learned, easily and as if he had instantaneously solved it. Dr. Monk shook his head. "Do you know why this place is where it is?" "Not if my theory does not suffice." "It is where it is because of a catastrophe. It was, that is, the mountain, of a much lower elevation. It may even have been only a hill, but some incomprehensible power lifted it to its present eminence." "What is your proof?" asked the other doubtfully. "This." And Professor Monk exhibited a small whorled shell in the palm of his hand, which he called a whelk. "Where'd you get this?" asked Dr. Eddy, "and what does it signify?" "I got it on the mountainside half a mile down, dug it out of a lime bed, and it signifies that the place where it came from was at one time under water." But how do you know that wasn't before this place was used as a sepulchre? Because, answered Professor Monk, the little bronze box there refers to this sacred tomb guarded by the volatile poison as an island. I don't doubt you, remarked Dr. Eddy, but I wish I read Aramaic also. That wish is only natural, but surely you don't in the slightest way question my reading, my dear professor. Not at all. Your reading is eminently reassuring to me, but to the public, you must remember, two savants' reading would be conclusive. 3. Shovels and picks were brought up, and a certain number of laborers supplied to the two professors. I had been assigned to them from the first. That's why I can relate so much of their conversation. They interested me, and they were worth listening to. The whole figure of the snail lady was carefully removed from the wall so that it could be reconstructed in a museum. And it was found to be only a veneer, put up in flakes on a suitably chiseled out place in the solid rock. All of the pieces were said by the professors to be semi-precious stones. Of course, to the average mine worker, this meant nothing at all. Even the most experienced were merely familiar with quartz, granite, limestone, and the various ores. While the muckers knew nothing, some of them disputed things accepted as true for the last half-dozen centuries. Now, the door, or what they believed was the door, was found to be in the shape of a truncated pyramid. That's what Professor Monk called it. And Dr. Eddy gave it as his opinion that it could not be battered in because the inside was smaller than the outside. Dick Grebs, who was a miner temporarily loaned to the university guys, was for drilling a hole and putting in a light charge of dynamite. But both the doctors vetoed this move. No telling what's inside, they said. So instead of a shot being fired, a hole was drilled clean through the door. Do you know that door was a foot thick? Well, it was. We measured it. After the hole was drilled, a stick was gotten of the same size as the hole. Pete Miller went out and got it. They were near the west entrance here, an entrance drilled for air, and Pete says he had to climb a tree to get it. Then they made little holes at the end of the stick and put in little springs, which would be compressed to fit the hole, but which would spring out as soon as they got on the other side of the door, and so give us a leverage. It worked all right. 5 of the boys removed the door easily. The air inside nearly blew out our lamps. We had to wait an hour before we could enter. I didn't care. You see, I got paid just the same. Our time went on. We weren't hired by the profs. We were merely loaned to them. Well, we hung around the west entrance. It was no entrance at all, as I told you, but an air shaft. All that time, and then Professor Eddy, testing the air, said it was okay. So we trails in. There was a sight in that room almost made my heart stand still with wonder. A lamp, in the shape of an icicle, with a beautiful blue globe, hung from the ceiling, and it gave a brilliant and weirdly penetrating light. The first thing which struck us as strange was the appearance of a man, a big, muscled fellow, a fellow even larger and more powerful than Reno Bob, standing to the north at a niche in the wall. We couldn't mistake this, for there were lights back of the fellow, so that he shone vividly before us. He was a real man. He held toward us menacingly a black tube of 5 barrels, which had a curious arrangement at the other end, as if it might be some kind of a gun. Now everybody saw this, all the boys and the 2 professors. We just looked at the fellow and gasped, as one would do who came on a live man in a tomb. The next moment, we looked and the fellow was gone. We went over to the wall and looked at the niche, and there was none there. Instead, there was a plate of what seemed like frosted glass. Now, did you ever hear anything like that? A man standing lifelike before you to disappear while you looked? Professor Monk cried to the doctor, "Did you notice his classification? He is pre-glacial." "What gave you such conclusion?" asked the other doubtingly. His robe. It was made of mammoth hair. But was it a man? Demanded Eddie. It may only be some kind of a projection, some method of throwing up on an apparently blank surface some image of something. Maybe we stepped on something which caused the thing to appear. So we had to trail out again and practice over our entrance to the place. No use. We couldn't tramp exactly right, it seemed. We never saw the pre-glacial man again. But say, you ought to have seen that wall. It was made up of an infinite number of squares, so that the roof was neither round nor square, but a kind of a compromise between. And on the walls, there were pythons and dinosaurs in wondrous color, together with gorgeous butterflies, much larger than any now known, and a funny bird, which Dr. Eddy announced as a near relative of the pterodactyl. It was quite a funny-looking bird. Only the pterodactyl was not a bird, but a flying saurian reptile. Editor. Then our attention being attracted to a great golden lizard. He must have been the god of all lizards, for he was colored like it, had fire in his mouth, a great golden head, flakes of blue, scarlet, and orange on his back, which seemed outlined on what appeared to be a row of shells around the whole room. Professor Monk looked at an inscription, took down what seemed like a piece of cardboard, and we all looked. It was light, and you couldn't see through it, and it seemed like some kind of a chart. In fact, in red outlines on a dull gray surface were some maps of something. But I never saw such maps. There isn't anything on the Earth's surface now like those maps showed. They were awfully funny. But Professor Monk gave an exclamation as if the source of life were discovered. Then he cried, "The land surface of terra firma before the last glacial epoch." But somebody trod on something which nearly gave us heart failure. Out of the floor of the room, on powerful springs, arose 2 caskets. Pete Miller was bowled clean over by one of them. But nobody laughed. It was too solemn a sight. In each of the caskets, which were supported on golden onyx pedestals of carved mammoths, lying in repose, not a hue different from in life, in elaborate costumes, were 2 figures. The one on the right was that of a woman. Strange to relate, too, it had a similar appearance to Dan Parker's wife. Now don't get me wrong, there's nothing at all to this likeness save what some fools like to give it. There were people who weren't friendly to Dan or to Reno who would like to infer that Reno wasn't just what he should have been because some idiot noticed that one of the figures resembled the lady in the Parker home. But I, who saw the caskets, say they don't know what they're talking about. It was only a distant likeness. The woman lying in that room had a long, drawn face, dolichocephalic, I think the professors called it, and her eyes were wonderfully formed, even when closed, like an angel's, it seemed to me. Whereas the man was dark and ferocious-looking. He had a mustache somewhat like the Norseman, and his body was encased in what looked like silver mail, but not in plates. Rather, it was like fine chain, closely woven together. On his head was a gold crown of filigree goldwork, the thing being a continuous circle of heads of the mammoth. The woman had on a dress of such fine texture that her body could be seen through it. It looked as if made from spider's silk. Maybe in that period when she lived, they paid more attention to spiders and had developed them to a greater degree than any living spiders these days. Her feet were clad in moccasins of rattlesnake skin, while the tiara, I thought it was a crown, but the professors called it a tiara, was of gold filigree work representing a circlet of butterflies, large sapphires being the wings and making them blue butterflies. But this was not all. There were 10 little gold boxes arranged in a circle around the room, standing on pedestals of white marble, the slabs under the little gold boxes differing and being semi-precious stones like sagonite, jade, moonstone, sardonyx, bloodstone, and stones even the professors could not recognize. What these boxes were, nobody knew. They had a little peephole and a glass somewhat like a lens inside, while behind was another glass piece which seemed frosted. But there was only darkness when one looked in these boxes. The professors puzzled their heads in vain, but could not make out what these boxes were. It was plain they were something important, or they would not have been arranged with such care, or been around, adorning, as it were, a king and queen. Professor Eddy stood at the casket of the queen, studying the lace collar she wore, an exquisite thing made almost of thistledown, it seemed, when he gave a little cry of surprise. "What is it?" asked Dr. Monk. "The secret of the boxes." "Where?" "On the floor here." Professor Monk looked and saw a number of golden squares arranged in a mosaic around a central dove. "I don't see the secret," he confessed. "Explain it." The other pointed to the floor and said, "Notice the dove is in the shape of a turn button." "What of that?" demanded Dr. Monk incomprehensively. "Turn it," suggested the other. Monk did so. There was the instant shining of light seen in the little gold boxes. Each of us, the professors as well as the workmen, selected a box and looked in. In that tiny box, in each of them in fact, was an inner 8-sided wheel, each side of which contained a picture, which the front lens made real, of some grand scene of the recumbent monarch's reign. Now don't get the idea it was like present-day moving pictures. It was far more natural. It was so made that not only were the scenes in their exact colors, but there was also some arrangement by means of which the figures seemed to stand out like in real life, instead of being flat like moving pictures are. Here they had some knowledge which the present-day moving picture industry would have given thousands of dollars to obtain, and they had it maybe 10,000 years ago. But the thing which excited Professor Monk most was a fantastic bronze-colored box set on a shelf at the feet of the caskets. It had in it little plates of some light material, the surface of the plates containing little squares, maybe half an inch each and a quarter inch apart. 12 of these plates had a ring through corners at top and bottom, uniting the plates. Monk looked at these through a magnifying glass and uttered an exclamation. "What is it?" asked his friend. "The history of the world 10,000 years ago." "You don't mean it," cried Eddy, his face filled with joy. "Now I must study Aramaic. I know I must." "Think of what it means to mankind," observed Dr. Monk. "Maybe the secret of the earth's shifting of its poles can be learned." Dr. Eddy picked up one of the plate books. "How much writing is on one plate?" he asked. "As much as is on about 25 pages of an average book. Each of these squares is a page. Look and see." Professor Eddy gazed through his friend's magnifying glass. "Wonderful!" he cried. "We are looking at the first book, Doctor." As it was now time to knock off work for the day, the professors and everybody else left the cavern and returned to camp, thinking nothing would be molested, as one would naturally think in the mountains where even doors are left unlocked. But they reckoned without taking into consideration the stupidity of some corporations. It is true the power part of the tunnel was the primary concern of those at the top, but they might have taken a bit more interest in the excavation still going on. If they had done so, such an irreparable loss would not have taken place. The night shift, which had been at work when the opening up of the secret chamber had been carried out, asked no questions as to whether explosions would in any way affect the discoveries made. Instead, when Parker, and I blame Dan for this, came to leave the hole, he touched off the holes he had drilled. Professor Monk gave a gasp and nearly fainted when he heard the shots. "What's wrong?" asked Professor Eddy. "Nothing," answered the other. "But they might have told us." "Who?" "Whoever set off those shots." "You're right," exclaimed Dr. Eddy. "It might have ruined those caskets. They looked like glass to me." 4. Professor Monk was so wrought up he could not sleep that day. You see, he had been on the night shift opening up that chamber of mysteries. So he went and got Professor Eddy, who was also awake, and the two went up to have a look. Now, I wasn't along this time, so I'll have to give hearsay. And hearsay, as anyone knows, is unreliable. When the two savants came to the room of their wonderful discoveries, they were aghast. And well they might be. There was not a thing to be seen of all that list of wonders. Professor Monk tottered. "You will not have to learn Aramaic now, Professor Eddy," he said brokenly. "Why?" asked Eddy, stunned and not knowing what he said. "Nothing to read." "Where are the tablets?" Dr. Monk picked up a handful of sand at the foot of the pedestal where the book sheets had reposed. "This is all that remains of them," he said. "They were made of glass." "But the caskets," cried Eddy. "Where are they?" Monk picked up a handful of sand from a heap at the foot of the carved mammoths. "This is part of them," he said. "But the bodies," interposed Eddy. "You don't grasp the nature of our discovery," explained Monk. "They were not bodies. They were glass replicas of the original. They were wonderful likenesses." "I'll say they were," said Eddy. "And the maps and histories?" "Glass, all glass," whispered Monk hollowly. "No wonder nothing remains of that age," remarked the other. "Nothing of the pre-glacial age. It was an age of glass."
Recording by Christopher Boswell. Return from Death by Hannes V. Bach, writing as Antony Corvius. They were seated in his parked car miles from the city when Robert told Ellen, "I'll always love you, darling, forever and ever. I just can't help myself and I don't want to." The girl nestled closer without reply. "And if something should happen to one of us, the other would wait, because love like ours will never know death. It must go on, for eternity," he continued. "I know that I'll love you even when I'm dead, and if there are such things as spirits, I'll come back to you somehow. Or would it frighten you?" Ellen pouted. "Don't be so funereal. It makes me feel strangely inside. Of course nothing can separate us. It's a beautiful night and we're wasting it on— Oh, dear!" Her eyes glanced at the small clock on the paneling. "It's late, Robert. You must hurry me home now, or Mother will be furious." Sighing, Robert started the car. As they roared toward town over the twisting roadway, suddenly the car swerved. "Look out, Bob! A man!" It was Ellen's high voice screaming. The car skidded sickeningly on loose gravel, crashed thunderously through the railing bordering the highway, and ricocheted, turning over and over, halting as wreckage. Robert was crushed under the metal bulk, losing consciousness. Thrown clear, Ellen scrambled to the man, bent over him. Something more than pain filmed his eyes. He heard himself muttering, "I'll come back. You wait," in a failing whisper as illimitable darkness swept over him, accompanied by dreadful nausea. A point of light appeared in the void, expanding into a dazzling rectangle which split into thousands of lesser planes. These shaped a geometric pattern which whirled dizzily, humming, the drone rising in pitch with every sickening revolution, becoming incessant mechanical scream. And this is death. This is past human endurance. With sudden omniscience, he knew that he was dead, and the meaning of the spinning pattern. The knowledge ebbed and carried with it all of his memories except for Ellen's face and her name. The wheeling design parted like a curtain, and Robert observed beyond it a branching path spreading before him like a flattened tree. At the end of every fork was Ellen's face, wavering and blurred. He fixed his attention upon the nearest furcation, aspiring toward it desperately, and sensed himself hovering in space. Shock, as of lightning coursing his veins, knotted him with agony. Involuntarily, his eyes squeezed shut. Icy air tortured his lungs. As he raised his voice in weak protest, the pain ceased and he relaxed, spent. His eyes continued shut, as though the lids were gummed down, failing in many attempts to open them. He quested food, found it, and consoled himself with it. Occasionally, plaintive voices babbled unintelligibly, arousing him. Always, if he listened, he heard a gentle murmur reply to the voices, and then everything was quiet. He felt very sleepy. Finally, he dropped off into slumber, deep and restful. Between periods of sleep, Robert struggled with his heavy eyelids. Memories might have associated his sightliness with blindness, but he had none. There were only Ellen's face and her name, which, when especially desperate, he called again and again. Gradually his vision became clear, and he stared in awe at a world of immensity which was peopled with titans. The picture of Ellen in this gigantic place troubled him, for the colossal beings looked upon him as an animated toy. Often he was elevated to their reeking mouths, kissed, and dropped aside. If he were insistent upon attention, inquiring for Ellen, the giants beat him and thrust him from their presence. Inert, bare-surfaced looming things enclosed him, from some of which, when he approached them, he was kicked away. Incredibly huge portals barred egress to an outer world, from which seeped strange, sharp odors. By calling his one word to the world beyond the doors, Robert endeavored to explain to the Titans that Ellen might possibly be outside, but they hushed him with amusement, sometimes with abuse. There had been others prisoned here like himself, while he had not seen, but they had vanished now. But this bothered him not in the least. His thoughts were of Ellen, and finally the giants lifted him and put him into a windowless room and clamped a fretted ceiling over it. The chamber rocked gently. He realized that it was being moved from one place to another. Leaping frantically, he touched the ceiling's lattice, clung to it, struggling to force himself through its interstices. Unsuccessful, tiring, he fell back, crouched in a corner, weeping. Motion of transit ended. The confining ceiling vanished. Robert scrambled over a wall, dropped to the ground of the outer world, whose heavy, conflicting odors, dazzling lights, and moving shadows alarmed him. Dim with distance was the withdrawing form of a giant which he pursued, crying out his one word, "Ellen!" The giant vanished among weird, wavering plants. Alone, Robert skulked nervously through tall, rustling things, was terrified at times by an unexpected sound or motion, but the swaying things appeared unaware of him, and he became self-confident. Discovering a stretch of damp earth gemmed with puddles, he drank. His head cocked at a sound reminiscent of Ellen, her soothing voice. A giantess had appeared over him. She was Ellen. At sight of her, Robert's pent memories burst free, overwhelming his consciousness with turbulent pageantry. He thrust up his arms. Gently indulgent, the girl bent and drew him near her breast. She cuddled him, cooing to him. At the moment, her monstrous size did not concern him. "I've found you! I've found you!" he cried. "Oh, Ellen, if only you knew how lonely it has been!" He opened his glad heart to her in a stammering urgency, bliss in his eyes, tears in his voice. Breathless, he raised his face to the girl's. She hesitated. Then she kissed him and set him down at her feet. She strode away. Crying with hurt amazement, he followed. She shook her head. She kept walking swiftly. He could not keep up with her, and he stopped forlornly as she disappeared behind an obstruction. He stared after her with unbelieving eyes. Though mysteriously stunned, he had returned to her from death, and she had not accepted him. He stepped close to one of her prodigious footprints in the mud and surveyed it grimly. His eyes sought an impression of his own foot, and suddenly he cried in mingled grief and horror, for there in the mud was his footprint, small, strange, the footprint of a half-grown cat.